So, Chris, this week, all anyone has been able to talk about is not o3-mini or deep research or Google's new Gemini 2 Flash model, but my hit single before o3 from last week's episode. And I decided to double down on this. Someone reached out, a record label, I'm the record label, and offered to publish my song. And so now we are official artists on Spotify.
It's so good. I can't wait to get my Jeffrey Hinton song on there. And also remember the song I made really in the early days called It's All So Easy about sim theory. It's like a sort of inspiring 80s classic. It's all so easy. So I'm going to get that on there as well.
Yeah, so it's on there.
Caged inside these walls.
Can we get it into the charts? Maybe into the charts, probably not, but
I think very unlikely.
Try. No, but in reality, OpenAI did release o3-mini, and we should talk about it right now. So OpenAI's o3-mini, it's got a 200K context window, which is very bigly, and 100K output tokens, which is also very bigly. What did you think of the o3-mini release?
Yeah, so I've started to use it straight away for my coding, and it has worked pretty well for me. It seems really good at providing complete solutions. I haven't really been able to fault it yet in terms of the day-to-day workflow. I also really like that it supports streaming, which is something that we didn't see with o1-mini and o1. So it's really nice to have that streaming effect when you work with it as well. The only thing I haven't tested as much as I would like is my maximize output test. So they say 100,000 out. So far, in at least my anecdotal testing, I haven't been able to get it to output to quite that level. And that's something I push Gemini on all the time.
So I thought one of the best things about the o3-mini release versus the o1 preview and o1 release was, like you said, the API capabilities. Like they had streaming, they had tool calling, they had, image recognition. Like they had everything day dot with the API, which was really impressive. Now we should also talk about there is different reasoning settings with o3. So if you use ChatGPT, there's o3-mini model to select from, and also o3-mini high. So this one's the high version. The naming is mental. Mini high. And the mini high one, obviously reasons for longer, takes a little bit longer to respond. So there is a difference between these models in the level of reasoning. I think what's interesting to me about o3-mini using it throughout the week is that it's fast enough now that you can actually use it day to day. Like it can be a daily driver. And I did daily drive it as soon as it came out, and I was really quite impressed with it as a model. It seems to have that o1 intelligence and oftentimes does seem way smarter than Claude Sonnet at code. When Claude Sonnet's tripping, I found o3-mini sometimes just absolutely nails the problem. But other times I found it suffering from that same problem I found with o1, which is when asked to return long output, it will just go off on its own whim and just change things. Like it'll put function in front of a method in code. Like it will actually change the structure of the entire code to suit itself, even if you ask it not to. So it does suffer from some of those strange problems that you seem to get with these reasoning models.
Yes, and I've also noticed that when you give it a much larger input context, the time it takes, I mean, it stands to reason, but the time it takes to get a usable... it spends too long reasoning, and the time to get a useful output can really increase. And so in the case where you've got an ongoing conversation that has a lot of context history, I know not everyone will use it this way, it can become a bit cumbersome working with it just for speed reasons when I don't really need it to take all that stuff into account.
Yeah, it was interesting too how they compare the models. So they really are comparing o3-mini to the o1 series of models, and they say with o3-mini with the highest level of reasoning, it outperforms o1 and of course o1-mini. They have o3-mini on medium reasoning settings. I don't know how anyone's meant to understand this outside of the sort of AI world that we live in, but o3-mini medium performs roughly equal to o1, and o3-mini on the lowest setting is a little bit worse than o1-mini, which I found surprising. This is on the competition math benchmark. And then PhD level science questions, o3-mini high performs better than both o1 and o1 preview, of course. And then o3-mini on the medium setting comes in about roughly the same. So really, according to their benchmarks, you're getting o1 when you're in that high reasoning level on o3-mini, but just much faster and much cheaper as well, which I think is a big factor here.
Yeah, I think the price is significant when you're getting pretty decent output. Like a couple of experiments I did, I got Gemini to write the full history of computing, which works out to be like, I think 40K of text. And then I put that into o3-mini and asked it to give its opinions on the text and like whether it's good and things like that. And it probably took like about a minute and a half to analyze that. And then, but it came back with a very detailed reply, with like deep insights. Like while the history is rich, sometimes the description blends technical details with historical narrative, like fairly in-depth analysis and thematic things rather than just, some superficial analysis. Like it actually seems pretty good. And then I asked it a command, how do I do word count on Linux? And it's like snappy, comes back straight away with a really simple answer, code snippet, in the correct format. So, in terms of its versatility, already for me, it's better than O1, because O1, I just have this mental block where I'm like, do I really want to wait that long to get such a simple answer? Whereas with O3, it seems like you don't have to worry so much about that. You just ask it and it's going to go to the level of detail you require.
Yeah, it does seem like how like they've taken that intelligence of o1, which many people probably like even us, I think, like a lot of people always say in the comments or have for the last couple of episodes when we bang on about Claude, and we'll get to this a little bit later. We're sleeping on o1 and we don't really understand how good it is. And if you look in the usage data of sim theory, I mean, it's a very like o1 is rarely used, if ever. Like it's, I think 54% of users in every session use Claude Sonnet. And people argue that's because all we ever talk about is Claude Sonnet being great. But again, I'll get to it later. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that it's not biased.
And one of the crucial pieces of evidence is we don't default to that model yet. But so like people are deliberately choosing it. It's not an accident.
Yeah, and so I like the way I have used o1 in the past is when I sort of get really stuck on a problem with Claude Sonnet, I will switch to o1 and then be like, "Hey bud, can you give suggestions of how to fix it?" And I always found that o1 would spit back something that the reasoning and the logic behind solving the problem or the idea behind it is sufficient that then I can switch back to Claude Sonnet and be like, "Hey, can you consider this and fix the issue now?" And that's always been my hack. And prior to o1, and people might laugh at this, I used to use GPT-4, the original GPT-4 occasionally, especially with smaller contexts, to be like, hey, can you look at this? Because I just found it could cut through the BS so much better than any other model. And what I've found myself doing with o1 is using it in that regard. But as a daily driver, like you say, I found it just too slow and painful to work with. And it spits out things in different formats than you expect. And sometimes it goes off in its own direction, I guess, because of the reasoning and potentially the wrong direction, which just causes me so much pain. But I feel like o3-mini has found this strange balance where I find myself saying, okay, it is smarter at code, I think, especially back-end code than Claude Sonnet, and it's fast.
Absolutely. I mean, I used it. I stuck with my commitment to use it for at least a full day, and I did. I made it the whole day without switching away. And like our time is precious. Like I have a lot that I need to get done in a day, so I'm not going to waste time mucking around with a model that's not getting me the output I need. And I was able to use o3-mini indefinitely. Like I just kept going. It worked really effectively for me, and I saw no downside to using it. So that's a huge step up from O1 in my opinion, both based on speed and to some degree accuracy. Like the o3-mini output is giving me exactly what I want. And I often talk about that. One thing that we find is in a longer session, a model that's good will get to know what's going on. Like it understands the use of the memory, the instructions, how the previous context should be considered for example, like how much emphasis to place on it. You find some of the weaker models will try and mimic the previous answers it's given. So if it's given a full code snippet before rather than just the updates, it'll tend to give full code snippets every time, even if you ask, hey, just give me the changes. Whereas I find that o3-mini doesn't do that. It's very good at responding and understanding what the current task at hand is, which for day-to-day use is extremely valuable.
Yeah, and I think that longer output context means that if you're writing a document or you're trying to reason over a bunch of PDFs or you're writing code, having the long output means that you don't get that lazy factor that you
Mhm.
seemingly get from models like Claude Sonnet, where if you like, return full method plus, it will actually give you the full method back. And I've noticed very few errors if you can focus it and say, work really hard, don't break anything. If you give it really ridiculous instructions like that, it tends to just give you exactly what you want.
Yes, and I think in sharp contrast actually to Claude Sonnet, because Claude Sonnet will still get lazy even when you repeatedly remind it, I only want the full code. Do not comment stuff out and things like that. Sonnet will, if the output, the file you're working with gets long enough, do that every time. And the only way to get around it, and we discussed this in the This Day in AI Discord this week, the only way to get around it is ask for the output in multiple parts, like part one, part two, part three, and it will gleefully do that. Like if you ever need long output from a model like Sonnet, just ask it to give it in parts, and it will be delighted that you've asked for it in that particular way, and it will be just unadulterated, full content output. Whereas I find o3-mini, you can get that straight up without having to go to these like quirks of the model.
Yeah, and again, I would say that maybe a lot of this intelligence was there in O1, but as you said, time's precious, daily driving and like pushing a model to its extreme limits, I think like we do, and also having the ability to easily switch models. I think if you're a ChatGPT subscriber and you're just stuck with like O1 and GPT-4, you probably are bullish on O1 because GPT-4o is pretty terrible, I think, at coding. And so then you're like switching over to it, and sure, like that's your experience. But when I can go between Claude and then just use O1 previously when I want to and when I need to, then it starts to meter the usage, like when it's actually needed versus not. Like for a daily sort of chat model about reasoning over documents or doing accounting or like whatever tasks I'm doing throughout the day, I've always found Claude for that chat experience is just better. But this week, notably since o3-mini came out and just sticking to it, I've found myself not always wanting to go back to Claude. There has been some instances if I'm working on some front end code, especially where I still find Claude Sonnet is better to write the output because it just seemingly knows what I want. And o3-mini's tune just still doesn't seem in that regard as good, in my opinion. So my initial impressions are super positive. In fact, I'm struggling now to decide between daily driving Sonnet still and then going to these models when I need them, or just sticking permanently to o3-mini, which I think speaks really highly of that model because previously, as we've been accused many times in the comments of being anthropic shills. My Daria necklace, by the way, still hasn't come. Hopefully it does soon. You can see that like naturally I will just go to the best model. I have no bias towards these models. I just use them to get the best level of like productivity extraction, call it. And so we'll see how it plays out. But Chris, one funny thing that we saw go pretty viral on X this week was this like weird demo apparently that tests models out. Write a Python program that shows a ball bouncing inside a spinning hexagon. The ball should be affected by gravity and friction, and it must bounce off the rotating walls realistically. And for those listening, it's essentially a what is it, like an octagon or a hexagon? And it's a hexagon with a ball bouncing in it with physics. So the ball is like a bouncy ball moving, and the hexagon's spinning around. And the comparisons that were going viral is one-shotting this in o3-mini versus DeepSeek. It turns out pretty much any model is capable of doing this, as you proved. I've got an example up on the screen now of the exact same example running. I think you use Gemini Flash, like the
Yeah, I
experimental mode.
deliberately used like one of the smallest models to do it. I also did it with like Amazon Nova and Nematron and ones like that, Hermes as well. And all of them can do it.
Yeah, and I decided to troll myself really hard by building the bouncy ball simulation. Uh, this one has a photo in it of Sam Altman in a gold frame. And I just made a mockery of the whole thing by spinning it up, being able to add many balls. But this is using O3 uh,
That
mini,
looks
mini
cool.
to do it. It's
I
pretty
did
fun.
find some of the larger models would do nicer options, like you could click to add more balls without me even asking that, for example. But I guess they're just showing off. But yeah, I couldn't find a model that wasn't able to do that demo. So I don't know if it is the best test of a model's proficiency.
Yeah, it's interesting seeing the community reactions, some of the more notable ones that cropped up on X as well. So this is Sully Omar's commentary on o3-mini. He says, my proper o3-mini breakdown after production usage plus comparison with everything else. o3-mini, agents, agents, agents. Finally, most agents work, great at coding. Still terrible design taste, incredibly fast, which makes it way more usable. 10 out of 10 for structured outputs, JSON. 3.5 Sonnet, still the all-round winner by a small margin. Generates great UI, fast, works really well. Basically, every AI product uses this because it's a really good chatbot and can code web apps. Downsides, tool
That sounds
calling,
like needless propaganda, Mike.
plus structured output. Yeah, my bias has crept back in. O1 Pro, best at complex reasoning for code, slow as, but very but solves hard problems I can't be asked to think about, so on and so on. And very trustworthy commentary by Matt Schumer. You'll remember him not being able to download the weights of his reflection model. When to use
I do.
when to use o3-mini and when to use Claude 3.5 Sonnet for coding. General advice: learning Claude, front end planning o3, front end implementation Claude, back end planning o3, back end implementation o3, and so on and so forth. So you can see, I think the commentaries quite comparable to what we're saying. Still notable.
These are like the same kind of people who drive like 20 kilometers to save 5 cents a liter on petrol, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I get a 1% discount, so I'm gonna go all this extra miles just to figure it out.
Yeah, I think still notable though is when Cursor released their O3 mini implementation, they still in their tweet about it on X said that, you know, the majority of developers still are using Claude, like, and we still recommend Claude, interestingly, in their product. And maybe that's just because it's just super optimized for Claude.
There also hasn't been much time. Like, I think a lot of it comes back to the factor I was talking about before. When you've got a job to do, you're going to go with your comfort, like what works for you. And I think for a lot of people, Sonnet has become that comfort. So I would say we need to give them at least a week before you start ruling out o3-mini as a valuable day-to-day companion like that.
Yeah, I think though that Sully Omer's comments are pretty spot on. Like it's so obvious, right, that OpenAI said the future is agents. And so the reasoning models are just ways of getting towards agents, right? Like, and that's why when you use them as a chat model, I think O1's not that great because it's
Yeah, that's what it
slow and
works
it's,
for, right?
yeah, it's just
Yeah.
not designed for that. And O3 Mini clearly also is not designed, it's designed as an agent based model as well. Like none of these models are chat models anymore, especially the reasoning ones. And I think that's why Sonnet has still stuck around so well, is because it most people day to day still are working in that sort of chat paradigm. And
Mm.
this inflection or transition to an agent paradigm is coming, but you know, the reasoning models have to improve and people have got to build out that stack.
Yeah, it makes sense because like when you are chatting with a model right now, like at least when I am, it's in aid of getting towards a larger overall goal. But I know it's only capable of getting me one step at a time. And often I might chain, say, three things I want it to do at once, but I'm never going like, really, hey, here's my goal for the day. Like, this is my overall goal. Bang, like one shot, please go do it all. Like, I'd never do that. I would break it down into the steps that I know from my expertise need to be done. Whereas I imagine a future where you're really like a manager, taskmaster kind of person who's like, here's the overall, top 4 goals for the day. I'm going to set whatever, O3 full off doing that task. And it has all the tools it needs, access to everything it needs to get that task. And it reports back, hey, boss, completed that task. And then you're like, hey, no, you're a dickhead. You missed this, you missed that, you missed that. And that's the second iteration. But it's done asynchronously. Like it is a background task, as you call it. It goes off, it does all the work, it stops early if it needs input, just like you would do with a real new employee. You would say, look, get up to this point and stop, then check back in with me and see how you're going. If you need any more input, if you're on the right track, show me a sample. And then you go, okay, no, that's fine, go complete it. And then you, as the sort of taskmaster, then goes, all right, well, what's next in our goals we want to accomplish? And you spend the time setting up the next task with all the information needed and go, all right, now you go off and do that. And the more tools and the more abilities these agents have, the better. And then it doesn't need to be a chat paradigm then, because the chat kind of element of it is really just a means to get the context to the point that, like, you're really like a sort of hub in the middle right now, copy pasting from here to there with the stuff you're producing and telling it what you need and preparing the context. If you can make that part of the reasoning of the model, then you don't need to do all that anymore, and the chat paradigm falls away. And then it doesn't matter if a task takes 15 minutes because you're not sitting around waiting for it.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of think that all of these other workflows or ways of getting there are just like intermediate things. And we were actually talking before the show around this idea with the Create with Code feature we launched in Sim Theory, where we were saying, like, do you ever actually look at the code? Do you ever actually edit the code in this feature when you ask it to build stuff and bark orders at it? And the answer is like, no, like never. In fact, why do we even want to see the code? And I think about things like Cursor and Windsurf and how they're introducing some level of like agency feature where you can say, hey, go complete these tasks in my code base, and off it goes in a number of steps. And like, yeah, you're still checking the code, like you say, because you've got to verify things and you've got to work in much smaller chunks. Like, you can't sort of just give it like the overarching vague goal and it just figures it out. Like, you've got to be very specific for it to work well.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the question around it is like, are all of these UIs and all of these things obsolete once you get to that next sort of extraction level where you're just barking orders and seeing a preview of what you're building? And I think that's ultimately what people want. Like, if I could work on the Sim Theory app now by just seeing it on local host, never looking at the code, like never, ever, ever, and barking orders like, hey, add this feature, come back to me when you're done. It comes back and I review it and it's all in voice or something like that. I mean, that to me, that's like the end game, right? Like, you don't, like, why do you need to see the code anymore?
Exactly. And I think that this is an example of where the models will need to improve, because as you said that, all my hesitations came to the fore, like, okay, but it needs to make sure all of the environmental stuff are good. It needs to know how to like restart processes and hard refresh if something like that is failing. It needs to know how to roll back specific changes or parts of changes if something goes wrong. It needs to be able to recognize the later, like the versions of all the tools it's working on and things like that, things which right now are every single thing that trips it up, that why you have to use that chat paradigm right now, because you'll try a piece of code that it writes, it thinking it's in like a pristine environment, you run it, it realizes, oh no, that's actually not going to work because you've got this different structure in your code, I have to do it. But overall, if we just put aside the technical challenges to get there, I agree with you. If the system can do the updates you want, why ever look at the code? You don't need to do it. Like, unless you're really fastidious and need things done in a certain way. But if your goal is just to get the software produced or whatever you're making, like, because remember, a lot of the people in our community are not really like software developers. They're making tools for their jobs to make their job easier or more efficient or make it more accessible to their community or their staff. So in those cases, why would you care about the code? You care about the tool and you care about the output, and that should be the focus. And the system.
Can I ask you a question, right? In theory, if I asked you to spend 24/7 on this problem right now, where you took a framework like React, a front end UI kit like from Tailwinds or Tailwind, or just gave it a component library, and you could control some of the variables, right? So you could fine tune the prompts to, to build the app. You had some sort of tree walker, so it could continuously understand the structure of the project. You had a deployment framework that it understood. And again, like I know some people call out like Replit and others that are already basically doing some of this. You
Hmm.
gave it a database, right? And then you allowed someone to bark orders at it to, or at least give it higher level goals, and then got O1 or O3-mini now, I guess, to plan it on the high reasoning mode, and then you went and executed a series of like somewhat controlled prompts. Do you think with the tools that are available today, you could build like a fully fledged SaaS app without ever looking at the code?
Yeah, I do actually. I think the main factors I think that would come into play are the following. Firstly, you would need a tool calling ability for the system to directly access the raw content of the files. Like it wouldn't be good enough to just give it code snippets and stuff. It would need to be able to say, the server.py or the settings.py, I want to read in the entire file as it stands right now at any time that it needs to be able to do that. It would need the ability to write directly to files as a tool call, like the whole file, or perhaps make partial updates, something that we do in Sim Theory code mode right now with the partial updates. And then it would need the ability, obviously, to run that code on a computer, see screenshots of the output, see error consoles logs. All of that is possible. It would need the ability to operate version control software, which it would have absolutely no problem with at all. Um, and then it would need the ability to have, it would absolutely need the documentation that relates to the current versions of the libraries it's using. One thing I see the models constantly doing is calling functions that don't exist in libraries, either because they existed before or they existed in a similar one and things like that. Um, then I think probably the main thing, and this is maybe where the reasoning models come in, is understanding how to break a goal down into its constituent parts. Because we know that single shotting complex programs doesn't always work, and it requires, like I think you've said in code mode, you've often had to get to 10 or 12 iterations to get where you want to end up. So I think it having some sort of overarching task planner where it can break it down into the steps and almost have acceptance criteria at each step to say, okay, we've accomplished, say, the database storage and retrieval for the data now, and it meets the goal. Okay, let's move on to the UI, for example. To stay on task, so it just doesn't go off into some weird situation where it doesn't know what the task at hand is. But I really don't see any limitations with most of the models. I think you could get a lot of the models doing this to be able to do that, but it would require good tool calling, very good tool calling. And it would also require really good prompting and making sure that it's able to break down the task.
Imagine then if it could call like OpenAI's operator API, or it could call Anthropic's computer use to a QA tester and be like, try the application, try and accomplish this task, to actually do its own QA.
I mean,
part of
maybe we
that
should do
build.
it as a demo. See, something I think that is highly, highly relevant to this is something you pointed out to me during the week, which is this open deep research. People are already trying to replicate what OpenAI did with their deep research mode. And what they have done is basically built this thing called small agents. I don't know about the name, SMOL agents, a bare bone library for agents. And what they basically say is that rather than regular tool calling that a lot of the models support, where it outputs this JSON format, which is basically a series of fields saying, call this function and give these parameters. And then it'll read that output and then decide if you put that output into the next call to the AI, and then it'll say, okay, do we need a subsequent tool call? And the idea is it iterates until it gets the job done. Basically, what they say is that is very inefficient, because it'll call a tool, get the output, then decide to call another tool, blah, blah, blah. And it's like you need to maybe have like parallel streams of that. You might create 20 JSON outputs before you get to where you want. Whereas if you just ask the agent to output code, it can do 4 or 5 steps at once in that code, read the output, iterate on that. And they've found that to be really effective. Now, um, why this is so relevant to this idea of getting the task done is that you can really get this thing to be able to retain memories around what it's doing. So all the assets it creates, like images, audio, other like files that it needs in order to get the task done, rather than having to remind it about that in every prompt, it can have tools that can access those things in memory as part of the code that it's producing. So I feel like a better framework for this kind of thing would lead to much better output. And the thing that they cite that's really interesting that they feel like is their current deficiency right now is lack of really good, say, browser control, like with the operator thing that OpenAI has produced. Lack of a really good ability to test the output of their programs. And so I feel like a lot of the work that's going to come for this stuff is going to be around really excellent tools that the system is able to operate.
Yeah, so like it does seem like to back up because I want to clarify. Like I know, again, there's Lovable and VO and Repl. Like there's so many doing this sort of the last app you'll ever need, where it's a chat-based interface and you're building the app. What I'm talking about is, can you say, hey, go and like rebuild me a custom Salesforce, here's a full spec. Maybe you get O1 to write the spec, so you can just be like, rebuild Salesforce Plus, and it just figures literally everything out. And then you get a finished product that you can go in and road test and then focus in on specific parts of that product and say, hey, go and obviously make changes or whatever. But it sounds like if a group of people put their minds to it, there's agents. The tools are available to build agents that could deliver this today more than likely, right?
Absolutely. And they say that in there. They're like, everything we need is around. We've just got to put these pieces in place and get them going. And I think it's more backup that, like in their output, they essentially show that this paradigm actually leads to better results on a lot of the benchmarks people use to test AI. So that whole, change my mind benchmark where it tries to convince you to change your mind about a particular topic. The other one is like, get me money or whatever, where it tries to convince people to give it money and all that sort of stuff. It does better when it works with this paradigm of writing pieces of code and using that to get to the next stage and things like that. And we saw this like really early on with like Microsoft's AutoGen and other, I'm the product manager, I'm the QA person, blah, blah, blah. But I think the models weren't really tuned around that stuff then, nor did everyone really have good ways of calling the various tools. It was just sort of like an endless stream of text. Whereas now it seems like that kind of tool calling, we've seen it with computer usage and the MCP stuff, is really possible. Like it really is possible to competently operate a browser and get the output that you need to do stuff. You've seen it yourself in our code mode in Sim Theory. Like you can literally take a screenshot of an existing SaaS application. You did it with Trello and go remake Plus, and it can remake the entire application that works with memory storage and everything. So the idea that a dedicated system designed to build software with relevant tools along those lines could absolutely competently build it. And I'll make one more point why I think this will work. In code mode in Sim Theory, we have a few crucial tools. One is the ability for the front end to save data. So it can actually accept a form request or just generally store data, like about your behavior on the page or whatever. So we provide that tool to the AI that is writing the code, and then it can invoke that when it sees fit. Now, it uses it in all sorts of crazy ways. Like in games, it keeps like telemetry information or data. It can accept form inputs. It can use it to store data in all sorts of ways. And you see it trying to use it for things that aren't quite exactly the fit. So, for example, storing temporary data that it wants to later retrieve, but there's no method to retrieve it. And so my point is that if you give it the right tools, it absolutely will know how to use them properly. So the question becomes, what are the tools it needs to be able to do all this stuff? Like, so writing and reading from a database is a great one. Being able to send notifications, being able to competently browse the web, being able to call external APIs without running into errors and rate limits and all the things that go along with that. Um, Being able to do deep research. So when it needs grounded information, so using Gemini's grounded search is a good example of that. Being able to deeply analyze documents and most importantly, being able to output in very specific formats that are needed for other systems. So I feel like a lot of the work to get this stuff in the place where it can really genuinely replace employees, replace key components in a business is going to be around really delicate and really specific tool calling that is made available to the AI in a way it can use. And I really think that's what we're seeing with deep research. It really isn't a major advancement in the model. It's a major advancement in chaining tool calling together in a way that doesn't go off the rails and get all abstract and weird.
Yeah, and we should move on to deep research by OpenAI. But I do think, in summing it up, I just sort of think the AI community and developer community on X, where a lot of this stuff is, quite popular and exploding in usage. The thing that's sort of missing here is, or the overarching thing that I'm starting to realize myself is like, no one cares about the code. Like, the code piece is dumb. Like, in fact, it's led me to believe that in the future with modes like create with code, why show the code? Like, it should just be called create or like portal or whatever. Like, there's
Well, I
just
said
no
it to you.
need.
It actually slows it down because we show the code streaming in, but that makes it slower. If you just skip that and just got the straight output, it would be faster. And I don't think it would be any less valuable.
I mean, you could have a whole longer discussion around this, is like, how long does SaaS and software have left? Or are people just simply too lazy that even if you give them these tools, like perfect tools that can build like something as capable as Salesforce in a controlled environment, or like actual software for their business, like they actually do it? Like, maybe the answer is no, they'll still buy it. But it's very interesting to think about, the price of this stuff. It feels like it's going to go to zero. Like
Yeah. But I mean, like, if you think about web apps that make a lot of money, all you would need to add to create with code mode to get to the point where you've got an app that's seriously making money is a proper database, proper authentication, and payment handling. If you had all of those things, you could use create with code mode now to make full on SaaS and maybe publishing to a dedicated URL instead of like one of our share links, right?
yeah.
But like, you're not far off being able to make full-blown SaaS applications. And the thing is, people in their businesses and industries know what the tools are that are needed. Like, we're seeing it already with the things people are sharing. They're really specific niche use cases that, as I said to you earlier today, there's a lot of things where you may not have even bothered making software before because the expense of paying someone to build that software outweighs the marginal benefit that provides. But if the cost is virtually zero or very close to zero, you're going to make tools for everything.
Yeah. And I think that these tools, like we said last week, will be somewhat throwaway. Like, you might even build a tool just for an initiative in a company. Like, we have this sales focus, so we're going to build a piece of sales software that goes off and finds leads in this category and does a bunch of stuff. And then once that project's over, you literally just throw
Or
that
like you
system
making
away.
software to like make a point on Twitter or ask me a single question.
Yeah, I often do now to troll people on X. Like, I'll create temporary software and just reply with the software because I'm like, oh look, here's all the evidence, or here's a way to visualize it or whatever. But yeah, I just have found myself lately, even if I think you summed it up much better than I did before about this idea of like, how do you actually go through the work day to day? And if I could just look at our app and be like, change this, do this today. And I'm sure some people will argue you kind of can, but I don't think so. I
Not
would.
in a way that you would trust.
No,
I think
the grounding is in the code for me right now, where I can read the database calls and I can read, I know it's secure. I know what I'm building's right. But I don't.
I think you mentioned it earlier with the research. And I know we're not onto that yet. but this idea of having a second agent or agents verifying the information. And I feel like that's what's going to be needed with the whole paradigm of codeless coding, where you have other agents that are coming in and QAing it, checking it, making sure it scales, like all of the things that a team would discover over time. Um, you would integrate into the system, so all the common pitfalls are being tested, like can it deploy to a staging environment, run the tests in a staging environment. Those kind of elements would mean you would get trust and confidence in the system. And I would argue, and we've worked with software developers for years, and always the test for me is, can I see it? Can I see, touch, and feel it? We would always say this when working on major projects, like, can I see, touch, and feel it? And if they're like, no, you can't because of this, we're just working on this system, there's a lot of time wasting going on, because you should always be able to get some evidence that there's progress. And I feel like with the AI, you get straight to that step. And that is how you should work with it, because that's the goal of what you're trying to accomplish. Like, if the system's there and you can see, touch, feel it, and it's doing what you want, why does the code even matter? I would argue that it doesn't. And I say this as someone who's been a programmer since I was 12. I really think the code is a means to an end. And unless you just do it for the pure joy of coding, that's fine. But like, if the goal is to make software, then you should not really care about the mechanism to get there if it gets you the software you want.
I think this is the challenging thing that people really have a hard time on right now, which is, once there's a stack of these agents built out for building a SaaS app or doing this, doing that, I think people think it's like this end game where this one app to rule them all will come along and all of a sudden they don't have a job, I just don't really see it like that. And I think that, even like Create with Code and VO and Replit and like all these different tools that are out there now, like no one's stupid enough to believe that these things right now are going to like replace a developer. I think what they are is just super productivity enhancers, right? And then if you think about the solution we just described, where you can go and build a fully fledged SaaS app, like sure, you can totally build that, but then you've got to figure out how to distribute it, how to build a brand, like how to train people to use it, how to get them to actually use it, how to then tweak it so people enjoy that product more. Like there's just so much more to that experience that.
Yeah, and I would argue that focusing on developers is the wrong focus. What we're instead doing is giving the ability for people who are involved in a business or an initiative or organization or whatever it is, the ability to actualize their ideas without needing a developer or the skills associated with that. They can take it from a frigging drawing on a piece of paper, like we saw in an OpenAI demo like a year and a half ago, take it from a drawing to a fully working application that they can then say, okay, make it prettier. Okay, make it store the user's data in a database. Okay, make it use this API to download the latest prices on
But
whatever.
this is where I don't know if like a general person's going to be able to do that. I think that it's still like you just said API. Like if I'm in a business and like, do I really know that? Like,
okay, sorry, yes, but what I'm saying is that they needn't worry about that. They should be able,
it should be able to just figure it out, right?
Yeah, it should say, hey, I know I can get the latest Bitcoin prices from this website. You're going to have to sign up here and enter your credit card. Can you do that and give me the code or whatever? And then it's like, okay, now I can get the prices. Like, it should be straightforward, human in the loop interaction when required. And then the next step beyond that will be the AI has its own money, has its own ability to sign up to stuff, has its own email, and it's like, hey, I just did this for you, boss. Like, it's within budget. We got it going.
But do you think because I think people, a lot of the fear around this stuff is like, oh, I'm going to be out of a job. Like this is job displacement and people feel threatened by it. Do you think they should feel threatened at this point in time? Or do you think that it's just going to make everyone more productive?
My own experience with talking to people is actually not really fearing losing their job. I think it's more so thinking about ways in which they can use the AI to either be more productive, enhance their job, or also just how they're seeing it being used in their industry and wanting to make sure that it's being done in a good way. So I would argue, I don't know. I haven't talked to a whole lot of people who've specifically worried about losing their job. I know it makes enough mistakes still, and it even says this in OpenAI's latest paper, that there's still hallucinations all over the place. Like, you could never just go, hey, I'm going to do this. But for example, I have a lawyer friend, and he was saying all of his staff are using sim theory with Claude specifically to work on legal documents. And it's leading to them being able to take on way more work than they did before, because these complex situations become something where they can take all of the input, produce a document, then they have real lawyers go ahead and review it because they're aware of all the cases where someone's presented case law that doesn't exist and all that. But it's literally money in the bank, because it's taking the leverage of that model to do the heavy lifting and making it something that's a no-brainer, and then you just verify. So I would say, like we cited early on, lawyers are like junior lawyers are going to lose their jobs, but on the contrary, the junior lawyers are just producing more money for the business now because they have the ability to verify the output of the AI, and at least for the short term, that's going to be required. So I I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know that the ubiquity of this technology is going to be everywhere, and I think that like the mainstream reaction to the AI technology is totally contrary to what I thought it would be. I think people want to know how to use it for their particular situations rather than fearing it, rather than wanting it to go away.
I read this quote and I wish I could attribute it because I forget where I got it from, but it's in my notes. Hallucinations are the last line of defense for white collar work.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of what I just said, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
the fact that it may not always be perfect is really gonna stop you just copy pasting directly from the thing, or just having it send out the documents itself.
I think that was a naturally good segue, though, the lawyers being able to make more money and still have people reviewing it with the next step of that. Because if you find yourself today with any LLM, you might get it to search the web, get it to search again, reason with it a little bit, like chat to it and go back and forth to get and extract the data you want. And then at the end, you might say, like, give me a summary of the conversation we've just had, which essentially is like a synthesis of all that research or work that you've done in that conversation. Now, I actually still think that that is going to play an important role in the future, going back and forth and you reasoning with it reasoning, like you working together and then coming to a conclusion. Because I think how humans work, right, is that journey of our mind that helps us understand the ideas and formulate our own opinions. And so I think that's one way. But the new way, it seems, is this idea of deep research or some agency where all of those steps, it's asking you a question. And this is how OpenAI's deep research works. You're saying, hey, can you go and research this topic? It then has another step, which is asking clarification questions. So it takes your question and says, you know, so just to clarify, like the following, like almost like an employee would really, like just to clarify the task, what do you want me to do here? You give it some pointers and then off it goes and it works away, crawling. Basically, how I believe this is working, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's essentially just in a loop. And the loop is saying, you know, go search this, go browse this, go do this. And it's slowly compiling like a scratch pad of data. And then at the end, it's outputting its conclusions.
That would be my understanding, yes.
And so I'll get to it in a minute. I actually did pay the unbelievable 200 USD a month fee. And no, my conclusion is it's absolutely not worth that right now. Maybe like lawyers or people could find use cases. But I think definitely the next evolution for it to be valuable is allowing it to get into proprietary data, like actual legal databases and like your own internal documentation and stuff like that. Like it just crawling the web seems to suffer from similar problems that the Google deep research of the exact same name did, where it'll form a viewpoint based on like the first 10 things it reads and then just chase that path. So you're just getting web slop regurgitated. But anyway, I did use it and I used it quite a bit. Look, I want to say one thing is I think this is super impressive because it's demonstrating the ability, as you said earlier, to call a series of tools. And as a result of calling those tools, like its output's improving and it's getting to this extreme expert level on tasks, as they say in the documentation here. So I think it's worth acknowledging that I'm actually bullish on this. Like, I think it's good, but I want to show you the current implementation and why I think right now hallucinations are truly the last line of defense. So as a joke, I said, I am considering investing in simtheory.ai, an AI chat GPT like startup that has all the models and modalities. I'd like you to research the company and provide me with pros and cons for an investment thesis, because I know there's a lot of investor analysts out there that this is like literally their job, right? Like go and analyze companies. So I thought this is an interesting task because it's something I obviously know a lot about. And I would be able to sort of test it here. So it immediately asked me for clarification before I begin the research. Could you clarify a few points? Are you looking for publicly available financials or funding? Do you want a competitive analysis? I said, yes, I want all of that. Work hard on this. So yeah. So it thought about it for 4 minutes. That's hard work for the model, but it is like 4 minutes is quite a long time in a model this smart's world. So here's the investment thesis. So it gets the initial introduction, right? Simtheory.ai. Now, keep in mind, I gave it the URL. Like, I literally gave it the URL, the source of truth. It says it's an early stage AI startup offering an all-in-one workspace, AI workspace platform designed for teams and professionals. The platform acts as a unified command center, yada, yada. So that's pretty good and not terribly bad. But then you get to the next section, which is, at the end of that section, it says, founded in 2023 and based in San Diego. I mean, I love San Diego, but Sim Theory, officially Simulation Theory Incorporated. No, again, gave it the website. Aims to leverage its proprietary technology and parallel computing to support these AI features efficiently. Below that, financials and funding history. Sim Theory is at a very early stage of funding. In December 2024, the company announced a $2 million pre-seed funding round. This pre-seed round was led by Larry Russ. Hi, Larry.
Give us the $2 million.
Yeah, where's our money? Angel investors Ryan Peterson, former CEO of Finger Food Advanced Technology Group. Anyway, it's absolute garbage is my point. Now, I don't know if it's just because like there's not enough sources, but I mean, again, I gave it, like I told it where to look.
But isn't that it's that, because obviously what's happened is there's another company with the same name, right? And it's gotten confused by that, but it's that exact kind of ambiguity that you would worry about in the depths of some advanced report, right? Like, you know this, so it's very easy to spot. But I don't think someone coming from the outside doing this would notice anything. They would accept that as fact.
So yeah, I think to your point, like if you're a lawyer and you just want to write like some sort of contract or whatever that's well researched, citing case law, and it has access to the relevant cases, which again, that's all proprietary right now, so it's kind of hard to get access to. And I think one of those companies that has the legal database will inevitably build this anyway. But my point being is, yeah, it's going to be riddled even in that case with hallucinations. And so therefore there is still that human in the loop. Someone's got to go through it and make sense of it. And then I question, is that more efficient than just, working back and forth with an AI to get to a point where doing the work along the way?
It seems like something that demos impressively if you're working with like something everybody knows and something that's undisputed and there's lots of information. But my biggest fear, like I just really feel like we've got to stop relying on the web so much, because it's like, how open to bias is that? Like, you can really easy bias the results. If not, regular people with SEO and stuff Google themselves or whatever search engine they're using. And then secondly, it even says in the paper itself, it's subject to rumors and other things like that. So it's like straight away, just straight up relying on the web for your research, to me, is not great. I think, though, the process itself is good. And I feel like if you did what you said earlier, which is where, okay, here are our trusted, grounded company documents that are absolutely true. And as far as you're concerned, treat them as if they are perfect. And then here's the additional information we're analyzing in a nice format. And then use deep research to go through that process to synthesize large amounts of data. Then that's good. And so in your legal example, right? Like the case law, there is case law publicly available, at least in Australia. You can review like most cases, right? You can buy transcripts or whatever. Um, it's a lot. It's a lot. So it would require research, like it would require a multi-step process. But I would argue that multi-step process in this paradigm would probably yield excellent results, but it can't use the web, like because that's just going to crush anything you do into like a lack of trust. And I think the other point on that is the outputs you showed me from this deep research are so long. Like, I'm not going to spend all day reading AI garbage output just to check that it's all correct. Like, it's going to take me all day just to read
Which
the stuff that
leads me to believe that apart from it being a fantasy toy right now, it's not actually useful in reality, because if you can't trust it and you're using it for real work, which is, let's face it, the people that are going to pay the money for it, like it just has no economic value in the current iteration. And I say that because I think there's easy ways that OpenAI, and then I'm sure open source versions and other people that are building stuff like this can solve these problems. Like, for example, when it gets a final report, you could then have another agent that goes through, and it's a fact checker, and its job is to literally look at the source, match it up to the fact, and see if it's relevant, and then run the final output again, and then get a proofreader to go through it and make sure it makes sense and there's no logic issues. And if you train those agents to spot these common hallucinations, I think you could probably get the output to a point where it's pretty strong. And then the other piece I would add is, I don't think this is their complete vision for this, right? Like, I think what's going to come is like, it's going to present this in a document. It's going to create charts. It's going to create images. It's going to allow you to download this as a PDF. It's going to be able to produce, multi-tab spreadsheets. We're seeing something in its pure infancy. I just think in its current formation, it's useless.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it more so represents a paradigm shift in the way we interact with AI models. And I keep saying AI systems because this isn't just a model, right? Like, it's more than a model. And I guess they're not even saying it's a model. It's a system. And I think that's what we need, is everything you just described and probably more that smarter people will think of, like in terms of all the components needed to be able to fully trust the output. And then once you've got that, and that becomes the component of a larger system where you've got your research bots, where you're like, okay, we're trying to accomplish this task to build a business plan for my company. You go research similar companies, like research agent, go research all the companies in this sector, the ones that have succeeded, the ones that have failed, bring that into the report. Research the market size, research the, trends internationally and stuff like that, bring all that together back into the basis of a business plan. And, like that becomes incredibly useful. If you can trust each of the components of research and each of the components of the analysis, and like you say, get this multimodal output where you're getting spreadsheets, diagrams, referenced content, almost like an expert analysis done on top of that, then, I mean, that's something you'd pay for. Like, that's something extremely valuable.
I just think you made a good point earlier, though, about like, you're not going to read it all. And so like any of the reports, like even that report on the investment thing I did, I didn't read it all, obviously. I just scanned through it because it's just too long. I'm like, I don't have time for this. I thought AI was meant to help me make decisions better, not like spit out. Like, I kind of think that the whole value proposition changes, because if you were going to like an analyst and saying, hey, can you go analyze the company? That investment decision is somewhat human, right? Like, no one can tell you whether to invest or not. So you go to this analyst, you might have 2 or 3 analysts in a room, and you say, should we buy this company? Should we invest in this company? Whatever it is. And you discuss it and you reason over it, and it's an emotional decision. There's an emotion in it. Like, I just love what they're doing. Like, I just love this, hobby rocket they're building. So I want to put money into that. I like the people. That could be a factor as well. And a lot of these decisions are like human decisions. They're emotional. And so I kind of wonder with these research reports, like, do people not value them anymore because it's like a robot? Like yeah, it's reasoned well and it's great in theory, but do I trust it? And we sort of saw this in the horse racing agents we built, right? Where it would study form guides and we would have multi levels of like our own hacked reasoning over it. And I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is I think there's still like this doesn't necessarily wipe these roles out in a way. I think it's just allowing them to synthesize a lot of data much faster.
But if you go the other way and you're like similar to with the code, like nobody wants to see the code. Maybe it's the same. No one wants to see the report. It's like, should we buy this company?
Yes or no?
It goes off, yeah, it does all the research, produces the spreadsheets, produces the graphs, produces all this stuff, but then it doesn't show them to you. It just says yes.
But I know this sounds crazy, but I think that's what people want. Because if you think about what I did, right, in all of my examples, I'm like, just tell me what to buy. Like, just tell. I don't care about your reasoning. Like, go away.
Yeah, do it. Do good reasoning, but don't spare me the bullshit and just tell me whether to do it or not. And then because that kind of makes me think like, do we go down the sort of doomsday path now where it's like, well, if it can make the decision in such a sort of binary way, like, do I take this action, yes or no? Then maybe it can just take the action as well, and you're not needed. Like, just give it the money and let it do it itself in that scenario. You know,
well, yeah, and then that's
call.
You're right. Then it gets to that point where it is making investments, and it's all the way back to the DeepSeek guy trying to originally build a model that would predict market movements, and that happened to lead to a research breakthrough. I mean, that's essentially where you get to.
But yeah, and I think that's what everybody needs to think about. Like, what is the goal of this technology? Is it to produce words? Is it to produce documents? Or is it to produce actions?
And answers. Actions and answers. I think answers and actions, they're the two outputs from this. And like, you know, like I literally just did then for the lol, said, so should I invest or not? Because like to get to the answer, and it gives me this waffling answer. But the last thing is, it's intriguing enough to warrant a yes from me.
Wow. Okay. So it actually, which model is that? O3?
It's using O1 to then reason off its own deep research, I guess.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. But that's how confusing it's getting. I want to talk about that in a minute. Okay, one more experiment, and then we've got to move on because we've been talking too long. I know we're meant to talk for the podcast. But
it is kind of the idea. Although I still vote we change it into an all music podcast. But yeah.
Okay, so Google search. So I just wanted to compare their shopping example because I found it a little bit odd as a use case. Like, I'm going to use deep research to try and buy the best product. Now, I kind of can empathize with their example in the video of deep research, which is you do spend a lot of time browsing the web and reading reviews and making a decision about something. I would again argue like the journey's more important sometimes, like reading different perspectives, and it forces your mind to think about the decision you're making. So sometimes the journey of that research is more important than necessarily the decision you make sometimes, or it heavily influences the decision. But I just did a Google search to sort of like ground this technology in reality. Like, so I was thinking about buying my kid for his birthday a fitness tracker. And so I just put into Google best kids fitness tracker age 6, right? And the first result is best overall kids fitness tracker Fitbit Ace 3. So and then it lists the other ones for different
courtesy
things.
of the Fitbit company.
Yeah, goodhousekeeping.com though. That's its main source for this allegedly. So then I did deep research for my $200 USD a month fee.
Yeah.
Best kids fitness tracker HX. By the way, I could have bought 3 of these fitness trackers for the price it cost me to do this research, just to clarify. And then it's like, could you be more specific? So then I had to do step counting. Mostly, I want to know as a parent if my kid is active or not. It said, got it. And then it spat out like, hang on, I'll bring it up so people can actually see it that are watching. Just an unbelievably epic report, which I'm, again, not going to read. Do not care. Like,
you should read it all word for word now to demonstrate our point.
Yeah, so it goes through the main options. It's too much. Like, I don't care. Like, I could have watched a YouTube video quicker. And then at the end of their research, I have to say, stack rank them from best to worst to help me buy. Like, it's not actually solving my problem. And then it's
Mm.
like Fitbit Ace 3 best overall choice. So that's really all I wanted to know, right? Like from my deep research. But I could have just done that in Google. Like it just returned like instantly. Like Google just gave me the answer. So I was looking for an answer. I don't know. Maybe for like more informed purchase decisions, I'm not sure. But I kind of think like
It is a good point though. Like I think looking back on when we worked on like the horse racing stuff and like as a good example, and I like those examples because there's a concrete outcome, like a horse wins the race, right? So it's a good example. And what I found it was weakest at was identifying situations where an unlikely event is more likely to happen, as in a lot of the time it just picked the favorite because it was a favorite for a reason, right? Like it had the best record, it liked those track conditions, it had the best jockey, whatever. So it's going to come to the same conclusion a lot of the time. Like there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's the wisdom of crowds, right? Like it sort of makes sense that the favorite is the most likely to win the race. But it's those scenarios where you're like, I need you to take a different perspective here. Like, I need you to, think what might happen because of some external unusual factors, because that's where I actually gain something. Like, I actually gain something where I'm like, hey, be careful about this particular race because of these factors. Like, this is really unusual. And while the favorite on paper is the best, I reckon something's going on here. It seems sus, like that kind of thing. And to me, that's what I want from deep research. I don't really want an obvious, straightforward analysis that Google can put in its summary up the top. Like that's not useful in terms of some epic, expensive AI process.
yeah, and I think that that's my problem with a lot of these repackaged uses of LLMs. Let's be honest. It's like it's again. I've said this before, but in The Simpsons, how Marge gets that dress, everyone likes it, and then she keeps
Yeah.
cutting it up to make different versions of the dress. I kind of feel like in AI, that's what developers are doing right now. Is just like cutting up the same models. I mean, the models are advancing. Don't get me wrong, but they're cutting it up to try and do the same thing. And like we talk about these like reasoning and thinking models, but are you really getting any new meaningful information out of
Well,
these
I think
things?
the counter argument to that, first of all, I think they give it new names and stuff because of marketing, and they want to be in the news cycle and whatever. But if you look at the Open Deep Research documentation, they basically say that it is better at these benchmarks and it is cheaper to run because you're getting more out of the model for less input. So giving it the ability to write and execute relevant tool calls is more efficient than using tool calls where the model outputs which tool it would like and which parameters it would like. It's demonstrably and provably better to do it that way. So I would argue in those scenarios, you are making the model better because you're using it in a better way. And we've spoken like all the time about all these latent abilities in models we may not even know is there. So while you're saying, yeah, people are just repurposing existing models and using them for different things,
No,
I think there's value in that.
but that's not really my point. I don't think I articulated it well. Like, I'm more thinking left, right brain, right? Like, when you think about a problem to come up with something novel, like a novel
Oh
insight
yeah.
into something in your brain, from my understanding, reading a bunch of brain books, is the hemispheres of the brain are essentially competing. It's a series of ideas competing, and then the best outcome sort of arises to the top. And I sort of think with these models, the problem, and you see it in deep research, they suffer from, and you see it in Google's deep research way more, is they head down this one path, form this one opinion that's the consensus opinion from the web searches they do, and then that's what it regurgitates back to you. It never sort of red pills itself or
Yeah,
blue pills
and
itself.
I experience this all the time when working day to day on Python code. For example, if it gets a specific train of thought around how to solve a problem, like the solution to this problem is to use X library, for example, it's really, really hard to shake it off that course of action and present alternatives. And when you do present an alternative, like, hey, had you considered just doing it this way? Like, did you consider just shelling out to a command instead? It's like, oh, you're right, darling. This is the correct way. This is the correct way to do it, and it'll give you like a perfect solution. So I feel like absolutely that is a weakness right now, whether or not with the models themselves or with the paradigm. They clearly know the alternatives that it's in there. It's just its ability to. It's funny because I listened to this lady called Irina Krush. She's a women's grand chess master and she makes YouTube videos. They're really good. And something she always talks about is candidate moves. And when you're trying to solve like chess puzzles in difficult situation, she says that you'll explore all the different lines down the candidate moves. But she said very often what happens is you miss one of the candidate moves at the start because it's not obvious. So it might be like, moving a rook into a position that doesn't give a check or whatever, but it sets you up for something later. And your brain will just dismiss that as a candidate move, even though it's possible, because it just doesn't look obvious. And I feel like that's what these models suffer from to some degree. They make the wrong first move, and therefore all the other moves are sort of predetermined in terms of their thinking. And it's only when you give it that alternative candidate move that it's then able to access the relevant knowledge and completely solve the problem.
Yeah, and I think in these reasoning models, like we're sort of told, oh, the model's thinking and it's reasoning like a human, but it's not. And I think anyone with half a brain knows deep down it's not. Like, because if it was in this deep research and other applications of it, like the O1 model, you would see it sort of having these counterpoints or figuring out or coming to conclusions far better. I think still at best, like it's a photocopier of like it's a synthesizing photocopying machine. It's not necessarily.
Yes, but I think with the right AI system, like if we come back to your idea earlier around how to make something like deep research functional in an AI system where you've got reviewers and editors and other simulated AI agents performing roles, you almost need another one that's like, are we even starting from the right point here? Like, it's almost like asking the right questions from different perspectives will yield better outputs. And that's actually like in sim theory, that's how thinking mode works. Like each of the steps asks serious questions about what is being produced before it runs the next iteration.
But this
And
is what I'm thinking is like imagine in that scenario, it's like multiple models challenging each other with different questioning and viewpoints and forcing those viewpoints. I know this again, like we've tried this ourselves, right? And like there's Microsoft Agent Framework, there's like Crew AI and a bunch of other ones. But I think with these reasoning models, yeah, maybe connecting them together with the better tool calling could yield that, but I'm not sure. Like I want to see it. We should experiment with it. I think we've gone down a path in this discussion now where I'm like, we've got to prove this or try it. Like,
yeah, I kind of agree. Like if you could find an example where it is able to find a much better solution through that kind of questioning and that kind of overseer model or like different participant model, I think I'd love to see a demo of that.
yeah, we'll reshape margin
Using
stress.
and I think we should do it using this library as well. I forget
Yeah.
its name.
So I want to get to the Google announcements. Before I do that though, I wanted to just address because I said in the YouTube comments last week, because a bunch of people were criticizing the fact that we bang on about how great Claude is. And I forced myself, this is again prior to the O3 model dropping, to just exclusively use O1 for I think it was like 2 or 3 days. One of the days was a weekend, so I wasn't working as hard, but at least 3 days to use it. And I'll be honest. There were times when I was really impressed by the improvements that have been made, and I do think some of the commenters were right that because of my initial O1 preview experiences and then the slow speed of O1, and then honestly, because when O1 came out, it wasn't a very good API implementation, so the outputs weren't very nice and there was no streaming, and so I just didn't use it that much. But I was at the time, as of the last sort of 3 or 4 episodes, I looked in my history, I was still using O1 at 15% of the time in my sessions, calling on it for help. So I was using it, but I was using it in that context of like Claude gets stuck, I throw to O1, I come back to Claude, right? So using it as like a second brain. And I have definitive proof that that's what I was doing and that was my behavior. But one thing I did after using O1 for a couple of days realize its strength, and I don't know whether I want to call it like reasoning or not, but in Sim Theory, we have these theme files, and I was creating a bunch of new themes, and I wanted them to look like far better. And I was actually quite impressed with what I was able to come up with. Like, for example, this is my new Mars theme here. I'll show you. Has like a nice Mars background and nice Mars colors for those people listening. But anyway, so I was able to get it to help me with some of these harder
And you said it was one-shotting those, like that
it
Mars
was
theme was like
one-shotting them.
perfect.
And the thing that it does better than Claude, right, is it thinks through the color contrast. So I don't think it's as good as initial design as, say, Claude. But in terms of contrasting things, you can tell it's thinking through the parameters in that JavaScript object, which shows and proves to me that it's far more intelligent, right? But I think getting access to that, like the accessibility of that intelligence, is what was crushing me with O1, right? And I do think now o3-mini has actually solved a lot of those problems. Like, it's faster, it's cheaper, it's quicker to access, all of those things. And I'll be interested to see now, as we said earlier in the episode, if I actually use o3-mini. But before o3-mini came out, I forced myself to stay on O1, right? I forced myself. I wanted to go back to Claude so many times. In fact, I started fantasizing about going back to Claude, and I clicked on the switcher in Sim Theory so many times to go back to Claude. And I'm like, no, I've publicly committed to this. I'm going to stick with it. If you don't believe me, I'll share my history in Sim Theory to prove.
I don't believe you. Share
to
it.
prove that I did. But anyway, there was a number of times, and it got me thinking. You know that song, don't you wish your girlfriend was a freak like me, don't you? That song. It got me thinking. I kept singing that song, and I actually was playing it on Spotify while I was working for the lols, because it kept reminding me of the fact that, like, I desperately wanted to go back to Claude because I was so frustrated by how slow O1 is, and how sometimes, like, you'll give it a bit of code, as I explained earlier in the episode, and it will just rewrite it in its own formatting. Like, it was putting commas after, like, methods in JavaScript and breaking my code randomly for no reason. And I'm like, I hate this thing. Like, it's not tuned right. And but I respect that it has a lot of intelligence, which now, thankfully, we're getting delivered in a better package in o3-mini. But anyway, I thought for the lols, I would write my own song from the perspective of Claude Sonnet, written by Claude Sonnet, that was in this vein of, like, Don't Ya, and this montage, really, of me during the week using O1, but desperately wanting to go back to Claude. So, Chris, here is my latest song premiere, Don't Ya, available on Spotify soon.
Your prompts make it clear. I'm the model you want, while O1's making you tear. o3-mini so basic, their responses are dry. You're sitting there waiting while their tokens crawl by. Don't you wish your AI was smart like me? Don't you wish your model was fast like me? Don't ya? Don't you wish your chatbot could chat like me? Don't you wish your runtime was rad like me? Don't ya? Fight through the errors, those timeouts all day, while I'm sitting here waiting, just one API away. They're giving you headaches with the responses so slow. You know that you miss me, just thought you should know. Don't you wish your AI was smart like me? Don't you wish your model was fast like me? Don't ya? Don't you wish your chatbot could chat like me? Don't you wish your runtime was rad like me? Don't ya? They're tuning so different, not the same as me. Altman's model stumbling, can't match my quality, while they're playing safe now, holding tokens back. I'm giving you what you need, that's just a straight fact. I'm the queen of completion, no hesitation. While they're still loading, I'm in conversation. O1's struggling, O3's taking forever, but Sonnet's responses, they're simply clever. Don't you wish your AI was smart?
All right, enough. I'll play the
like
rest of
bridge.
the end.
I hadn't heard that bit. That's cool.
Yeah, the like bridge rap is exceptional. Anyway, I one-shotted that from Sonnet, which was pretty impressive. I literally described my experience through the week and how I missed it, and said, "Can you write a song about this in the frame of Don't You Wish Your Girlfriend," or whatever the song's called? I think Don't Ya. And
that's cool.
it outputted that. So that's pretty cool. I enjoyed that. I'll play the full song at the end so that everyone can listen to it. The 4 viewers that actually like our songs, but
That's why I was so blown away. Like, of all the songs we've ever produced, I thought that rap was the worst, and there were so many comments unsolicited. Like, how good was that? That's really good.
Yeah,
Shows how much
I couldn't. I actually was shocked when I was hearing you say it. Like, you were like, "Oh, I think it." Straight away, and I was like, I think that's the best rap ever. I think you were just judging the vibe of the song, like you didn't like the
I have no
structure.
taste nor knowledge about rap, so it's probably that. It's
Yeah,
probably a
well,
good
didn't
sign
we
if I
already
don't like it.
realize that you're like blind or something on the show before? Or what's the
Oh,
thing you
like
suffer
I
from?
have no imagination. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no imagination, exactly. All right, moving on. So Google announced Gemini 2 Flash general availability finally. They've had the experimental model out for ages, which everyone's been fully aware of. They did introduce a new version of the Flash model, Flash Lite. And also we got a preview of Gemini 2 Pro, which is an experimental model now. I think they just put this on them now so they can sort of fix things or tune it a little bit better before launch. Let's just quickly look at the price per million tokens here with all the models that we've talked about on the show today. I've got it up on the screen now for those that watch. So Gemini 2 Flash Lite, input per million is cheaper than DeepSeek V3, DeepSeek R1. It's cheaper than obviously Gemini Flash, but it's so much cheaper than GPT-4o Mini. Gemini 2 Flash is 10 cents input per million. 4o Mini is 15 cents per million input. And I would say, I think Gemini Flash is a way better model than 4o Mini.
Yes, I agree.
Output tokens per million is 30 cents per million for Flashlight and only 40 cents for Flash. Honestly, the pricing is so close between Flashlight and Flash. I don't really understand why you would scale down outside of just it Flashlight being like insanely fast. One thing I would like to note is I went into trying these models out like I normally do with the Google stuff, being like garbage. Like, you know, it's going to be garbage. So I already in my head went into it being like, there's no way these things are going to be good. And what I was able to do with the Flashlight, literally.
I think they realized the
Yeah,
joke.
no, I
right?
know, but like still. I was able in Create with Code, admittedly, so it's got a bunch of tool calling it can do, is create my own version of Google in like a few shots, super fast, like do cats like dogs is my query here, and it'll go off. It pretends to do a Google search, it calls an LLM and then creates fake results, right? But look at the quality of this app. Like it came up with its own weird like celebration Google logo, and look, I get actual results. I get the suggested searches.
Wow.
I get like, you know, they look real. They're all fake.
Think about that just in isolation, that you just remade Google essentially, that works in like what, 30 seconds, maybe less if it's faster.
Yeah, and then so that was one, and then the second I tried the new Gemini Flash, which again, the speed of the Flash model and the capability it offers and the lack of censorship where it doesn't trip you up, I think is phenomenal. So I gave the new Gemini 2 Flash general availability model, to be clear, a screenshot of Google Docs and said, okay, can you make it exactly like the real Google Docs layout see screenshot for how it looks? Now, it's not a perfect replica of Google Docs, but it fully works. Like I can
Yeah, I tried
rename
it when
it.
you made it. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I'll put the link in the description, but it even saves the state. So like you can go back to the URL, right? And work with it. But to like I think it was like 2 shots or I mean I did like I added icons and some colors and stuff later, which is why you see 8 versions at the bottom. But yeah,
But it's
like
one thing that's notable is the first time I ever, because I always liked GPT-4o-mini, right? Like I always thought it was pretty good for the price and for what it can do. And indeed, we use it for a lot of the internal operations in Sim Theory itself, like naming chats and adding knowledge graph information and just maintenance tasks that run in the system, right? Because it's quite reliable and it's good at instruction following. But these Geminis, like this round of Geminis, they're very hard to fault with that instruction following. There's a lot going on in code mode. Like it's not easy to do, especially the updates, um, to get them going. And for their smallest and fastest model to just do it that competently is incredibly impressive. Like I actually thought that we'd have to compensate for it.
oh, I think we will have to compensate. There were times when it added like those markers and things we used in our code to know what to update. And I had to say every time, I must admit, do a full rewrite because it couldn't handle that.
Okay, yeah.
So I think the flashlight model does sort of have those drawbacks.
But I mean, when
Gemini
you think
Flash
about it
doesn't.
in terms of like a multi-purpose model with huge context, I mean, that's pretty amazing. And multimodal as well. That's really powerful.
I mean,
Like
I
at
never
that
thought I'd
price.
say this, but if you want to have an unrestricted conversation with Gemini 2 Flash and explore ideas, even if they're slightly controversial, it'll do it. It'll have that
Really
conversation.
interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we have the sort of safety stuff turned completely off on our version of it, or at least we did with the experimental model. And so it's unrestricted. Now, here's the main drawback I think of Gemini 2 Flash that they need to think about or fix. It struggles, which I can't believe I'm saying this. And I've used it on both Sim Theory and in AI Studio to just validate this because I was like, oh, maybe it's our implementation. If you go through a long conversation with Gemini 2 Flash at code, early on, it's surprisingly good. Like it feels Sonnet-ish, like it's really good. like, but after a while, I find it just forgets. Like even though it has such a big context window, right? Like I think it's 1 million tokens. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
So they say 1 million tokens, and it just doesn't feel like it's very good at like isolating the chunk that I want to. Like it seems to just really forget. Like it does that thing Sonnet does after a very long conversation of just losing context completely. Like it just loses the plot. Gemini Flash 2 seems to suffer from the same problem. If they could somehow resolve that and have it focusing better on the context, then it would be on the top of my list. Like it would be really high up there as a model for me. But I think these context windows Google announce, I don't buy it. I'm sorry. Like I just every time I try shoving in a lot of stuff, again, whether it's on Sim Theory or AI Studio or even the Gemini web interface, I've used them all to test this thesis. I just never get great results unless I'm one-shotting something. Like here's a long video or here's a long transcript. Then it works fine.
The big test for me is always how much output can you get because they promise so much output. But in my experience, it's just not possible to get any of the main models to use their full output tokens. The only way I can do it is if I repeatedly say, put your code in parts. But even then, it's only filling like an 8,000 token context. Like to get meaningful amounts of tokens just isn't possible. Like I can get Gemini to write like 2,000 to 4,000 words, for example, but it's just nowhere near the 100,000 that they promise. And I don't know if I'm doing it wrong and there's some special technique to it, but it seems to me like just because it can output that many tokens in theory doesn't mean it actually ever will.
Yeah, it's
And
strange too because they highlight it. Gemini 2 Flashlight is cost optimized for large scale text output use cases.
Yeah, maybe I just need better examples, but I just I just haven't been able to do it. I've got a bunch of test scripts I have to try every time there's a new release, and I just can't do it.
But interestingly, with Flash as well, they say image outputs coming soon, audio outputs coming soon, multimodal live API, which looks like a great API. It says in experimental. It supports structured outputs, which we already knew, function calling, which we already knew. The grounded search as a tool is like built into the model now, or built into the API at least, and code execution as a tool. So it's a very complete and comprehensive model. Like it's so cheap. Like it's a serious contender now, and
The other
mostly
thing I
because of price.
Yeah, and the other thing I really wondered about it is we tend to use the models the same way for all of the models, but Google has so many unique features in its ability. Like you can put a native PDF in there without pre-processing it, for example. You can put raw audio, raw video, and it'll handle it all on its side. Admittedly, it's a little clunky to work with, but once you've done it, you've done it. And so I feel like we probably haven't even really seen it shining at its full ability. Like if you build your tooling around to embrace the things it supports, especially that grounded search, we may even see way better results. And indeed, if we work out the right way to prompt it to get more output, like one of the examples you've spoken about a lot is with code mode, rather than outputting just one file, saying, all right, I want 7 files for this project. I want a CSS file, JS files, like a database file, whatever it is. I feel like a model like that may have the capability of doing that. So I really feel like we've got to push the Gemini models harder because there's probably a lot more capability there than we're actually giving it credit for.
Yeah, they also in the Gemini Advanced product, I'm doing an example now to show this is the one you pay for, like Google's Chat GPT like thing. They have this model 2.0 Flash Thinking Experimental with Apps. I'm not kidding, that is the name. Let me now read all the names that you can select from. 2.0 Flash for everyday tasks plus more features. 2.0 Flash Thinking Experimental, best for multi-step reasoning. 2.0 Flash Thinking Experimental with Apps, reasoning across YouTube Maps and search. 2.0 Pro Experimental, best for complex tasks. 1.5 Pro with deep research, get in-depth answers. 1.5 Pro previous model. 1.5 like, come on. Now let's go to GPT, Chat GPT. GPT-4o, GPT-4o with scheduled task, O1, o3-mini, o3-mini high, O1 Pro mode, GPT-4o mini, GPT-4 legacy. Like, I get it. Like, we obviously in SimTheory have a list of all the models. But that's our app. Like, that, yeah, like, whereas these guys, they're like fighting for the consumer. And then they think it's okay to have this, like, it's bonkers. It is bonkers. Anyway, here's the reasoning. I said, what happened in the latest This Day in AI video? It says, to answer this, I should search YouTube for This Day in AI and lists all its reasoning. And then it goes through, the user is asking for a summary of the latest video of This Day in AI. I've used Google search and YouTube to identify the channel. It seems to be this channel, yada, yada. And then after all of that reasoning, the output is, I am sorry, I cannot fulfill this request. I am unable to locate the This Day in AI video on YouTube using the available tools. So it doesn't even work. So the experimental with apps, from my experience, and I used it about 6 times.
Yeah, I was gonna say you probably couldn't get more straightforward than that.
Seems pretty easy, right? It's garbage. Like I don't get. I know it's experimental, but like, wow, way to not impress us.
But see, again, I feel like a company like Google, they're not the best application developers, right? They made Gmail, it's good. They made search, it's good. But really, other than that, or Maps. But I guess they acquired a lot of them.
Photos
I don't know.
is pretty good. They're all acquisitions though, and really good entrepreneurs.
All their best stuff are acquisitions, and I just wonder, like, if it's the tooling around it that's well, I mean, I know it's the tooling around it that's suffering there. That's not the model's fault. Like, had the model been given the correct data, it probably would have done a great job.
Yeah, it seems like they have a lot of good models and a lot of good ideas floating around, and their execution of turning them into products right now is pretty weak. But I am impressed. I think they're getting better, and I do hope when Gemini 2 Pro comes out of experimental, it's improved a little bit. I think right now the weakness, just playing around with it a bit, is it's just the tune of it again around code's not that great. It seems to be tuned really well in non-front end code. So like for back end and like if you want to do like 3JS animations, which seem to be all the rage right now, the new Gemini 2 Pro is actually, the experimental is like really good at it. But do anything front end, like make me a website or something, it's, oh my God, it's so bad. So yeah, anyway, I think I really like the Gemini 2 Flash model. I enjoy it, and I do find myself switching to it and using it sometimes. And I think if you're an application developer, it's really one to consider. It's super cheap, super fast, it's very capable, and it has all those tools built in. So I think from a developer point of view, Google's really in a good spot, and Gemini 2 is exciting. Is it groundbreaking and like a leap ahead of the competition? No. Like there's just it's not even close. All right, so the last thing I wanted to run through is we've now basically seen Gemini 2. Let's be honest, we've seen o3-mini. Obviously, we haven't seen o3. I played around during the week. I didn't even mention with o1 Pro as well, which, for those wondering, I didn't actually find any different to using o1 with the heaviest level of reasoning. I don't know. I know other people swear by it, but I tried it on some complex problems. One of them being that I couldn't figure out what was broken in my code. And it turned out it's just a Python thing. I literally had one line tabbed wrong, and the o1 Pro found that problem instantly. But then I gave the same input into sim theory using the o1 model, and it also found it instantly. So I think it was a bit of a placebo effect of me thinking, oh, it's so much smarter. But then I tested it in other models that they also figured it out. So it was just Claude Sonnet failed at the task. So I'm not entirely sure on that one, but it does feel like outside of the reasoning and the tool calling and starting to tune these models better for tool calling, like, you know, we haven't seen a model yet that's like leaps and bounds ahead, which does make me start to think with DeepSeek R1 and somewhat the commoditization of the thinking models as well. Like, are we going to reach this plateau with commoditization now where all the models become roughly the same? And I know everyone else is thinking this as well. And is it just the products we build on top? Like the product we talked earlier about, like going and building like a custom software machine for businesses.
Yeah, and then speed and cost become the big factors then. Because it's like if those iterations are faster, it just makes everything better to work with.
And it kind of speaks to the fact that if you look at OpenAI right now, instead of building some god model that can just like with tools that can just you can consume via a API and go and do all this stuff, right? Just by instructing it. It's really, if you think about their latest product launches like Operator, it's mostly tooling around spinning up a virtual Chrome browser and using it. That's hard. Like we went through that with computer use ourselves where we're spinning up full VMs. It's hard and expensive and time consuming to do that. And then if you look at deep research, it's really just using a series of tools on a loop and then having a more fine-tuned model for that task. So they're really building products now. They're not launching new models. Like they're launching products.
I agree. And then I think in some cases they're masquerading them as new models when really they're just systems that are there. But I think they're not trying to hide it with deep research. But I agree, a lot of their work seems to be on the use of the models rather than the models themselves.
Yeah, and I'm super curious to see like Grok 3, which is trained apparently on the biggest supercomputer cluster ever in the world. So I'm curious to see if it's just on par with the rest of these models. Like I think o3-mini, what's interesting is like, yes, I think it is smarter than say a Claude Sonnet, but and on par with o1 like they say, but is it vastly smarter that it's changed your workflow? Like absolutely not. Like and so I just we're not seeing those huge leaps, I don't think, from the models. I think the models are becoming commoditized.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so lol of the week before we go. Someone actually shared this on our Discord, which is the cheese test, Chris. Google remakes Super Bowl ad after
it was Westy,
AI
just
cheese
to give appropriate credit.
So Google has re-edited an advert for its leading artificial AI tool, Gemini, after it overestimated the global appetite for Gouda. Is that how you say it?
I don't know how to say it.
Okay. Correct me in the comments. The commercial, which was supposed to showcase Gemini's abilities, was created to be broadcast during the Super Bowl, yada, yada. Anyway, Google's stuffing up again, referring to incorrect facts about the consumption of cheese in their ads. They had to re-edit
But
it.
what I don't get is why did they release it? Like, didn't someone go, hey, that doesn't seem right?
I feel like that's just not a Google thing. Like I think they just outsource so much. Someone's just verbatim gone to Gemini, been really confused. Like, which model out of these 5 models should I select to create the copy and facts for this ad? And then they've probably used thinking experimental with apps and it's failed. So
I'd love to think that someone has like retrained it on our output where we talk about the solution to and cause of all health problems is cheese.
Yeah.
And it's just taken that way too seriously.
Yeah, maybe like we've polluted the ad. So don't forget, if you're still listening at this point, to to go to Spotify if you use Spotify and add the Before O3 song to your account. All royalties go to us every time you play the song. So I wonder how much we'll earn.
It'll be like Mariah Carey's Christmas song in the end, I reckon.
Yeah,
We'll just
maybe.
be living off it for years.
Yeah, this could be it for us.
We need to make a Christmas theme song. That's how you make the big bucks.
All right, let's do a Christmas album at the end of this year. I'll commit to that. But yeah, I'm interested to share like seriously what the royalties are from publishing this song, because I can tell you we will not make the money back paying to have a distributor to put this song out there. There's like zero chance.
I don't know. You never know. My Hinton song may really take off.
It's all for the lulz though. I'm quite surprised. So at least now we'll see factually how often people listen to these songs. When you say your songs are better than mine, we'll be able to figure that out.
Yeah, it's a bit of a race.
All right. Any final thoughts? The week that was deep research. o3-mini, and then the Gemini models. What's your takeaway?
Yeah, my main thoughts are I really want to see o3-mini in high mode. We've only added it in the default mode in Sim Theory, so I want to see how that performs and give it more challenging tasks throughout the week. I'm also keen to look at the early stages of background tasks and explore this framework that we spoke about earlier, the one with the strange name that I've already forgotten. I really want to get into that, and it's called Small Agents. I really want to try that out and really, like you said, put some of this stuff to the test. Like, is it actually doing a better job at getting me further down the line with things I'm trying to accomplish? Or is it just a bunch of nonsense that leads to output that I don't care about? And I really think that just generally that's something we need to be exploring is like, are there different ways of working that get better value out of the models?
Yeah,
basically?
and I also just think a check-in on like, where are we at with this? Because it's handy to know for our audience and even for us, like, are we all going to be out of a job soon or not? Like, it's the litmus test, right? And I think also, are these things really capable outside of the hype?
Yeah, and I think for me in testing this small agents things, it's really about like, is it, as they say, simply a lack of tooling? Like, is it just better tools and it'll get the job done? Or is it a case where it really just can't stick to an overall goal and that's the problem? Like, that's what is of most interest to me. Because we know that the tool problem can be solved.
And I would say the other thing is like, can you get a better output of deep research just by looping over other tools? Like, if you think about OpenAI, they're limited, right, to their own stack. Whereas like, if we do it, we can use Perplexity, we can use Google to cross-reference, we can loop around a bunch of different tools and technologies because we're not confined to just using their models.
Like right? even image inference and different files and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, and then get Claude or something or whatever, like another model to then rewrite the final report so it's summarized better or in a better tone of voice. And I just think, I think piecing all this stuff together still is going to yield the best outcome as opposed to being like all in on your own technologies from these labs just because they have to. Like, they have to sort of commercialize those models.
Yes, exactly.
Anyway, we'll see. Leave your comments below. I wonder if all the haters in the comments about the us loving Claude Sonnet are now going to be like, oh, now you're deeply biased on o3-mini. I'm sure it'll happen. All right, we will see you next week. That was a long one. That was really long. Whoops.
prompts make it clear. I'm the model you want, while O1's making you tear. O3-mini so basic, their responses are dry. You're sitting there waiting while their tokens crawl by. Don't you wish your AI was smart like me? Don't you wish your model was fast like me? Don't ya? Don't ya? Don't you wish your chatbot could chat like me? Don't you wish your runtime was rad like me? Don't ya? Don't ya? Fight through the errors, those timeouts all day, while I'm sitting here waiting, just one API away. They're giving you headaches with responses so slow. You know that you miss me, just thought you should know. Don't you wish your AI was smart like me? Don't you wish your model was fast like me? Don't ya? Don't ya? Don't you wish your chatbot could chat like me? Don't you wish your runtime was rad like me? Don't ya? Don't ya? They're tuning so different, not the same as me. Altman's models stumbling, can't match my quality, while they're playing safe now, holding tokens back. I'm giving you what you need, that's just a straight fact. I'm the queen of completion, no hesitation. While they're still loading, I'm in conversation. O1's struggling, O3's taking forever, but Sonnet's responses, they're simply clever. They're simply clever. Don't you wish your AI was smart like me? Don't you wish your model was fast like me?